Hello. I thought I'd try and finish this book. And I had a minute, so I thought I would. I'm just reading. I think I'll read let me see if I can find a nice picture. Hold on just a moment. Let's find a nice campfire. Oops, wrong one. That's not a picture of a campfire. It's a good one with some breathing space. Want some with some breathing space. Well, that's kind of nice. That'd be nice. Let's see. Oops. Oops. Okay, well, we'll try that. There we go. That's better. Hi, Lee. Yeah, I'm ready. Ready to. Let's see here. Let me see if I can fix this to be a little more charming. It's a little more charming. So yeah, I'm plagued. I'm plagued by the idea of not finishing this book, and it's driving me crazy. So, oops, hold on, sorry. So yeah, I was thinking I wanted to finish it. See if I could finish it. So that's what I'm doing. So where is... I don't know if this will show. I don't think it'll show that. Will it? No. Oops. Oh my goodness. That's not it. Oh, have fun. Have a fun dinner. I'll see you later. Thanks for popping in. Hit the like on your way out. Like, share, subscribe. Alright, let me see if I can find... Now, where did I put my... Oh, there it is. Where did I put the book? Where did I put the book? Oops, is that... Did I screw something up? Oh, I see. I did screw something up. Okay, that's fine. Oh, there's the book. I guess I should make a little subtitle here. Oops. Oops, that's not the right one. That's the right one. Okay. I think I spelled that right. Okay, so let's get to it. Let me get reading. Let me get to reading. Oops. Okay, good. Didn't ruin it. Alright. Currently reading chapters of Democracy Awakening by Heather Cox Richardson, who's a historian, and it does contain some challenging historical descriptions and quotations, so consume it with caution. And it's okay if you fall asleep. That's actually the point. So I hope you had a great day. And here we go with chapter 22. Declaring Independence. Far from being a part of the divine plan, the idea of American democracy emerged from the peculiar circumstances of 13 of the 18 British-governed colonies in North America in the years between 1763 and 1776. The desperate attempts of the British government to raise money to pay for the 7 Years' War had convinced a motley group of colonists that they could create a new nation, based on an idea that men were entitled to have a say in their government. It was not an easy sell. In 1763, in the aftermath of what was known in the colonies as the French and Indian War, British colonists were quite content with their position in the British Empire. They liked the steady hand of the king's officials. It brought order to the colonies, which were governed by England but were neither English nor orderly. The population of the British North American colonies came from Ireland, Scotland, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, Spain, the continent of Africa, the Caribbean, and of course North America itself. The people were split by language. Hi, Paul. Culture and religion. In addition to Protestants, not only did Jews and Catholics put down roots in early America, but Muslims hailing from Africa were among the earliest settlers, and indigenous Americans practiced their own religions. Colonists were divided by legal status, too. By 1763, most, though not all, black Americans were enslaved to their white neighbors, and while indigenous Americans lived throughout the colonies, they usually did not share the same legal protections as whites. Women and children were legally considered the property of their husbands or fathers, and yet the colonial economy depended on black, indigenous, and women's labor. Even colonists who shared racial or ethnic identities didn't much trust one another. Those wealthier folks who lived in settled communities on the coastline thought of the poorer folks who had moved west to find land on the frontier were lawless, profane, uncultured, uneducated, and overly religious. Westerners returned the favor by thinking Easterners were snooty, money grubbers who deliberately left their Western countrymen advance the page to the mercies of violent gangs and the indigenous Americans who wanted no part of those moving onto their lands. Neither did those in the rural areas trust those in the bigger towns. Oh, cool, Joni Mitchell, that's awesome. I'll have to look that up, Paul. Neither did those in the rural areas trust those in the bigger towns, which clustered around seaports and contained newcomers from all over the globe, with their new ideas, new economies, new pastimes, and new diseases. Cities were places of great excitement, ferment, and possibility, but they were also places of great danger, as well as places of social stratification, where wealthy men jostled against sailors and sex workers. In 1763, it seemed the only thing holding this mess of humanity together was the strength of the British crown, and colonials were happy to rely on it. Immediately after the 7 Years' War, that reliance on British power seemed to be a good call. British authorities had turned the war in Europe over to mercenaries, and focused on the North American colonies. They had supplied the armies locally, creating an economic boom, while colonists fought in every major engagement, strengthening their ties to the crown. When the war ended, British subjects in North America had reason to believe they were the equals of their cousins in England. The economy had thrived during the war, and they foresaw a bright future as they moved into the land on the western side of the Appalachian Mountains. That euphoria was short-lived. The king's ministers and parliament set out to guard against another expensive war between colonist and indigenous Americans, and to pay for the recent war that had badly stretched the treasury. They prohibited colonists from crossing the Appalachian Mountains and enacted a number of revenue measures, including the 1765 Stamp Act. This law hit virtually everyone by taxing printed material from newspapers and legal documents to playing cards. What Parliament saw as a way to raise money to pay for an expensive war, one that had benefited the colonists after all, colonial leaders saw as an abuse of power. At stake was not just money. The fight over taxes tapped into a struggle that had been going on in England for more than a century. Could the king be checked by the people? Over the course of the next dozen years, colonists would come to answer this in the most radical way possible. They concluded that the people had the right to govern themselves, but getting a majority of the dissimilar and disorderly colonists to be willing to risk their lives and their livelihoods for that principle would require leaders to explain to ordinary colonists the intellectual arguments underlying complicated laws. Between 1765 and 1776, they mobilized people in the streets and used an extensive media network that emphasized community. American fascists used a similar strategy later, but the colonists used it for democracy rather than autocracy. Democracy Awakening Notes on the State of America. Oh, cool. Okay. With the imposition of the Stamp Act, men in Boston took to the streets to warn that their rights as Englishmen were under attack. In August 1765, rioters attacked the home of colonial officials. They hacked open stamp collector Thomas Hutchinson's front door with an axe and looted the house. Groups of dockhands, sailors, and workers would call themselves the Sons of Liberty, and similar gangs would spring up across the colonies, organizing for their right to consent for their own government. Thanks, Paul. It's not an audiobook. I'm doing commentary on it. While the Sons of Liberty was generally a catch-all title for those causing trouble over the new taxes, enabling people to remain anonymous, prominent colonists joined them and at least partly directed their actions. Lawyer John Adams recognized the importance of the gang activity for changing the political equation, writing in his diary that gatherings of the Sons of Liberty tinged the minds of the people. Gathering Sons of Liberty tinged the minds of the people. They impregnate them with the sentiments of liberty. They render the people fond of their leaders and the cause, and averse and bitter against all opposers. Meanwhile, John Adams' cousin, Samuel Adams, who was deeply involved with the Sons of Liberty, recognized that building a coalition in defense of liberty within the British system required conversation and cooperation. Voters elected him to the Massachusetts legislature, where his colleagues promptly made him clerk of the House, responsible for corresponding with other colonial legislatures. Across the colonies, the Sons of Liberty began writing to like-minded friends, informing them about local events, asking after their circumstances, and organizing. By 1766, the Stamp Act was costing more to enforce than it was producing in revenue. Parliament agreed to end it, but claimed full power and authority to make laws and statutes to bind the colonies and people of America in all cases whatsoever. It imposed new revenue laws. News of the new taxes reached Boston in late 1767, prompting the Massachusetts legislature to circulate a letter to other colonies opposing taxation without representation and standing firm on the colonists' right to equality in the British Empire. Meanwhile, the Sons of Liberty and their associates called for boycotts on taxed goods and broke into the warehouses of those they suspected weren't complying. Women demonstrated their sympathy for the rights of colonists by weaving their own cloth and drinking coffee rather than relying on tea. When British officials sent troops to Boston in October 1768 to kill the revolt in its entirety, colonial leaders turned to the printed word to draw on the Massachusetts Commonwealth's long history of community cooperation to urge unity against the growing threat of tyranny. In March 1770, British soldiers shot into a crowd of angry men and boys harassing them, killing 5 and wounding 6 others. Engraver Paul Revere turned the altercation into the Boston Massacre. His instantly famous engraving, which circulated almost like a poster, showed soldiers in red coats smiling as they shot at colonists, including black man Crispus Attucks, like fierce barbarians grinning over their prey, approve the carnage and enjoy the day, end quote. News of the repeal of all but one of the revenue duties, the one on tea, and the removal of the troops to an island in the harbor calmed tensions in Boston, leading Samuel Adams and his colleagues to worry that their campaign for the right to self-government would be lost. It's amazing to me how much reverence we have for these historical figures, and yet they really just still were some of the shittiest people. It's kind of amazing how many shitty people are in the world, I guess. Building on their success in using the power of the written word to transmit information during the Stamp Act crisis, Adams and his colleagues, Dr. Joseph Warren and Mercy Otis Warren, in 1772, began to organize committees of correspondence to write to other colonists sharing information about their rights. Then, in May 1773, Parliament gave the East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies. This move was intended to help the failing company financially, and by lowering the cost of tea in the colonies, convince people to buy it, thus establishing Parliament's right to impose a tax. In Boston, the Committee of Correspondence posted a guard on Griffin's Wharf at the harbor to make sure that tea could not be unloaded. On December 16, 1773, men dressed as indigenous Americans boarded the trading vessel Dartmouth. They broke open 342 chests of tea and dumped the valuable leaves overboard. Parliament responded by closing the port of Boston, moving the seat of the government to Salem, stripping the colony of its charter, requiring colonists to pay for the quartering of soldiers in the town, and demanding payment for the tea. By fall 1774, concerned delegates from the colonies met for 6 weeks at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia to figure out how to respond to the government actions, and also how to work together to advance a constitutional opposition to tyranny, as Samuel Adams put it. This First Continental Congress reflected that the weight of government had begun to shift from Britain to the colonies. Massachusetts took advantage of that shift, organizing the Massachusetts Provincial Congress to take control of the governance of the colony. It stockpiled supplies and weapons in Concord, and called for towns to create companies of Minutemen, ready to fight on short notice. Finally, determined to end the rebellion, British officials ordered General Thomas Gage to arrest Samuel Adams and Boston merchant John Hancock, who were rumored to be in the Lexington area. On the night of April 18, 1775, Gage sent out about 700 British troops to arrest the men and seize the supplies in Concord. Sons of Liberty William Dawes and Paul Revere rode out ahead of them, warning the locals that the British regulars were coming. At about 4 o'clock the next morning, the British soldiers found several dozen Minutemen waiting for them in the darkness before dawn on the Lexington town green. When ordered to go home, the men began to leave. But then a gun went off. The soldiers opened fire. 8 locals were killed and another dozen wounded. The regulars marched on to Concord to destroy the guns and powder still there after the Patriots had removed most of it, but they found their return to Boston cut off by Minutemen firing from behind trees, houses, and the glacial boulders littered along the road. Still, the colonists were not quite ready to declare independence. The First Continental Congress had disbanded the year before with plans to meet again if tensions had not ceased, and under the circumstances delegates regrouped on May 10th in Philadelphia as the Second Continental Congress. They elected John Hancock president of the body. Delegates made plans for raising an army, but still hoping to avoid war, they sent a petition to the king reiterating their loyalty and suggesting that the problems between the colonies and the British government could be laid at the feet of corrupt officials, not the king himself. Even before it reached him, the king declared the American colonies to be in rebellion. There was still one last step to take before the colonies would declare independence. They had to be ready to separate from the king. In January 1776, a newly arrived immigrant from England provided that spark with his pamphlet, Common Sense. In it, Thomas Paine rejected the idea that any man could be born to rule others and thought it ridiculous for an island to rule a continent. He called for independence. Paine's spark set to flame more than a decade of accumulating tinder. The 47-page pamphlet sold more copies per capita than any other book in American history, and reached even more than those who bought it, as advocates of independence read it aloud in taverns and meeting houses. By April, state and local governments across the colonies began to write declarations of independence, and a convention in Virginia asked Congress to consider declaring the United Colonies free and independent states, absolved from all allegiance to or dependence upon the Crown or Parliament of Great Britain. Congress postponed debate for 3 weeks while a committee prepared a document announcing independence and explaining why it was imperative. Congress appointed John Adams of Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, Robert R. Livingston of New York, and Roger Sherman of Connecticut to write the draft, but after generally agreeing what should be in the document, the members turned the project over to Jefferson. He, in turn, cribbed from other declarations to produce a draft, which Congress then cut by a quarter. The final document, adopted by Congress on July 4, 1776, explained to other nations that the people of the colonies needed to dissolve their ties to Britain and, quote, assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. Because not just Parliament, but also the king had repeatedly tried to establish a tyranny over them. And with that, the men who signed the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776, pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to defend truths that 12 years of mob actions, committees of correspondence, political debates, newspapers, and broadsides had convinced them were self-evident: that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. In 1815, after their retirement from the crush of public business, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson chewed over the events of 40 years before. Quote, "What do we mean by the Revolution?" Adams mused. "The war? That was no part of the Revolution. It was only an effect and consequence of it. The Revolution was in the minds of the people, and this was effected from 1760 to 1775 in the course of 15 years before a drop of blood was drawn at Lexington." That's the end of chapter 22. Take a break. I don't think our American Revolution is over yet, then, Paul. There's still so much racism and oppression and fomenting of hate. Feels like it's stronger than ever. And I'm sure to those that are consistently on the unfair receiving end of it, it feels like I don't know. I'm sure it's upsetting. Time to change the vape. Thank you for coming tonight. Impromptu. Although it doesn't seem to matter. Anyway, help small voices. Sometimes small voices need help too. But you are here. You're helping. So thank you for helping small voices. We appreciate it. Yeah. Oh, you're 3 hours. Oh, that's right. Yeah, no, I know. I know it's late. 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 Small voices. Yeah. Teeny voices. Teeny tiny voices. I know, Lee. Thanks, Lee. It's late. Lee, it's getting better. I know you know what I mean. It's slow, but it's getting better. No problem. With big sticks. Yeah. I have my moments. Oh, this is good. I don't know what I'm smoking, but it's really good. Alright, let's keep going. We got a lot of chapters to do. Thank you, Grandma. Alright, here we go. Chapter 23. The Constitution. Lolo is our dog whisperer. There you go. Late night DJ, narrator, humorous, and bon vivant. I like bon vivant. I'm gonna put that on my bio. New bio. New links in bio. New pussy in bio. Weird. Twitter's weird. Alright, here we go. The Constitution. This is good because I didn't really learn a lot of this stuff. I was not very good about it. It's funny, I like history now more than I did when I was young. I don't know why. Because I really liked history. I used to love the movie 1776. I thought that movie was great. But maybe I shouldn't admit that. Media literacy. There you go. Put your money where your mouth is. Alright. Okay. Anyway, here we go. Chapter 23. The Constitution. The Declaration of Independence had asserted the colonists' new country would be based on the ideas of equality and self-government, rather than on social hierarchies, religion, or ethnicity. But it said nothing about how such a government might actually work. Because the white men who drafted the Declaration saw it primarily as an assertion of their own right to be equal to other white men in England, they did not immediately take on the larger implications of their principled stand. Instead, they focused on the nuts and bolts of building a government, and after a false but very instructive start, they came up with a complicated plan to enable the states to work effectively together while also tripping up tyranny, the Constitution. That false start was the Articles of Confederation, hammered out by a Second Continental Congress during the Revolutionary War, when fears of government tyranny were still uppermost in lawmakers' minds. The Articles of Confederation centered power in the states rather than in a national government. They declared firm league of friendship among the 13 new states, overseen by a Congress of men chosen by the state legislatures, and in which each state had one vote. In the document's first substantive paragraph, the authors wrote, Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this Confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. The new pact gave the federal government few duties and even fewer ways to meet them. Bringing the states together into a loose confederation of friendship was a disaster. Within a decade, the states refused to contribute money to the new government and were starting to contemplate their own trade agreements with other countries. An economic recession in 1786 threatened farmers in western Massachusetts with the loss of their farms when the state government in the eastern part of that state refused to relieve debtors. In turn, when farmers organized under Revolutionary War Captain Daniel Shays and marched on Boston, propertied men were so terrified their own holdings would be seized that they raised their own army for protection. The new system clearly could not protect property of either the poor or the rich, and thus faced the threat of landless mobs. The nation seemed on the verge of tearing itself apart, and the new Americans were all too aware that both England and Spain were standing by, ready to make the most of the opportunities such chaos would create. And so, in 1786, leaders called for a reworking of the new government. The result of their effort, the United States Constitution, became the fundamental framework for a government based not in men or religion, but in law. It explicitly declared that no religious test shall ever be required as qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. Hold on just a moment. Bear with me. Alright, sorry about that. Back here. Let's see, where was I? Let's see, crucially... I think that's where Crucially, unlike the Articles of Confederation, the U.S. Constitution was based on the idea that the federal... Oops, hold on, let me make sure. Darn it. There we go, okay. Tiny computers. Okay, here we go. Oh, no, you didn't. Oh, sorry. Forgive me just a moment. God damn it. There we go. Okay. Let's try this again. It asserted that power to govern derived from the people of the nation, and it created a national government to represent them. The document began, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." The Constitution established a representative democracy, a republic, in which voters would elect lawmakers who would represent the people. That legislative branch would be a balance to the single leader at the head of the executive branch. Each would prevent the rise of a tyrant. Each would prevent the rise of a tyrant. Oh my goodness. Why am I losing my place? From the other side. Congress would write all necessary and proper laws, levy taxes, borrow money, pay the nation's debts, establish a postal service, establish courts, declare war, support an army and navy, and organize and call forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. The President would execute the laws, but if Congress overstepped, the President could veto proposed legislation. In turn, Congress could override a presidential veto. Congress could declare war, but the President was the commander-in-chief of the army and had the power to make treaties with foreign powers. It was quite an elegant system of paths and tripwires, really. How to enact representation in the new republic was harder to figure out. How could the people have a say in their government without leaving them prey to demagogues who would tear the new nation apart? It was not an easy question, especially with the uneven demographics of the country. Small states were jealous of larger states' population numbers, while Northern leaders had no intention of letting Southern leaders inflate their power by counting their enslaved neighbors as part of their population base. So the framers divided Congress into two houses: the House of Representatives, in which the states were represented according to their population, and the Senate, in which every state had 2 votes. To guarantee that individual states wouldn't grab too much power in the House by creating dozens and dozens of congressional districts, the framers specified that a district could not be smaller than 30,000 people. Then they required a census every 10 years to make sure there was an accurate sense of who was where. To avoid rotten boroughs in which politicians inflated their power by counting people who could not vote, the framers counted enslaved Americans not as full person, but as 3/5 of a person. The system was designed to adapt to new circumstances, but slowly. To ensure that the House could respond to changes in society, the framers established that it would turn over entirely every 2 years. The Senate should be slower, they thought, and so they gave senators a 6-year term, allowing only a third of the Senate to turn over every 2 years. In 1789, a special committee wrote 3 lists of senators, and then a senator drew the lists out of a small wooden box to assign their terms. Senators from states added later drew straws to determine their terms. Senators would not be elected directly by the people, but would be chosen by the state legislatures. Hi, Tom. The framers placed the executive midway between the rapid turnover of representatives and the slower turnover of senators. Presidents would serve for 4 years, making them more responsive to the people than senators, but not tied to the popular political whims like representatives. But how could voters from far-flung colonies have any idea who would be the best candidate for such an important role as chief executive? In those days, before mass media, unless they were seamen, most men rarely traveled far from their homes, and it was entirely possible that the different states would cast ballots only for their favorite sons. For how could a man in Massachusetts know who was a great thinker in Georgia? With this in mind, the framers came up with a representative system for presidential elections. Voters would cast ballots for electors, made up of as many prominent men in their states as the state had senators and representatives. Those men would meet as a body, the Electoral College, and settle on a man or, more likely, a few men who would be a decent president. If the electors could not agree on a president, the choice would go to the House of Representatives, where every state would have a single vote. Finally, the framers authorized a third branch of government, the judicial branch, with a Supreme Court to settle disputes between inhabitants of the different states. They also guaranteed that every defendant had the right to a jury trial, but said little else about the judiciary. What they were clear about was that the new national government overshadowed the states. They provided that the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but went on to stipulate that the Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators. The federal government had the final word. The Constitution provided the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states, and promised that the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion. Finally, it declared, this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. The framers fought over different provisions of the document they had produced, prompting 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin to remind them that states are on the point of separation, only to meet hereafter for the purpose of cutting one another's throats. He added, I cannot help expressing a wish that every member of the convention who may still have objections to it would with me on this occasion doubt a little of his own infallibility, and to make manifest our unanimity, I can't say that word, whatever, you know what I mean, put his name to this instrument. They did, and popular ratifying conventions put the Constitution into effect on June 21st, 1788. But the framers weren't quite done. Those still nervous about government tyranny had refused to sign on to the Constitution without a promise to amend it immediately, with a list of rights that would be free from interference by the national government. The first Congress of the United States passed the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, to put fences around federal government, saying it could not establish any specific religion, silence the press, police speech, or stop the people from assembling peacefully, take away the right of the people to bear arms, deny trials by jury, arbitrarily seize property, and so on. These rights were not rights given to individuals, as the modern Supreme Court has interpreted them, but rather were designed to hold back the government if it began to overreach. States ratified the Bill of Rights on December 15, 1791, and the framework for the United States of America was in place. The principles behind it were democratic, that every citizen should have an equal say in the government, and that every citizen would be equal before the law, although its practice was almost exclusively limited to white men. It was a great experiment, as first President George Washington called it shortly after he took the oath of office, but it had a crucial flaw. The framers did not foresee the rise of political parties. They figured that, having thrown off monarchy, Americans would all agree on their form of government. To the degree that they disagreed, framer James Madison argued in the famous essay Federalist No. 10, they would break into small factions and so cancel each other out, much as the presence of many religious sects in the country ensured that none gained the upper hand over the others. But partisanship appeared almost immediately. Southern leaders opposed Washington's policies, conceived by Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, that strengthened the hand of Northern businessmen in the national government. Virginians like Madison and Thomas Jefferson maintained that their opposition to such national power made them the true defenders of the Constitution. Partisanship turned out to be an important innovation. It engaged ordinary voters and provided oversight of lawmakers, but it also weakened the nation's framework, hampering representation and many of the checks the framers had built into the system. The first thing to go was fair representation. By 1796, political leaders had divided into two camps, and Jefferson saw that he would have won the presidency if only Virginia's electors had all voted as a bloc in the Electoral College, rather than splitting their votes between him and John Adams of Massachusetts. Jefferson urged Virginia to adopt a winner-take-all system that would give all of the state's electoral votes to whichever candidate got a simple majority. It was a stunning change, and one that appalled Madison, who wanted to amend the Constitution to prevent it. He died before he could get such an amendment ratified, and other states quickly followed Virginia, manipulating the new system to give their own top candidate a leg up. Today, only Maine and Nebraska still split their electoral votes, with the result that candidates campaign almost exclusively in states with large electoral vote counts. The framers also did not foresee, although this perhaps they should have, that eventually politicians desperate to keep their party in power would add new, sparsely populated states to the Union, as the Republican Party did when it brought 6 new states into the country between 1889 and 1890. They were quite open that their goal was to make sure that they controlled the Senate in order to stop legislation they didn't like, even if the American people wanted it. The framers also did not foresee the growth of vast cities, possible thanks to modern industry, including steel, and transportation. They could never have imagined the astounding size differences that would develop in the modern era between the states like California, which according to the 2020 census has almost 40 million people, and Wyoming, which has fewer than 600,000. Living in small, largely rural states, the framers put a lower limit but no upper limit on representation. When the 1920 census revealed that urban Americans outnumbered rural Americans for the first time, the House in 1929 capped its numbers at 438 to keep power away from those urban dwellers, including immigrants, whom lawmakers considered dangerous, thus skewing the Electoral College in favor of rural America. Today, the average congressional district is 761,169 individuals, which both makes representation less effective and reduces the power of states with more people. The government that the framers designed, hammered out by 55 young white men sweltering in Philadelphia in summer 1787, to permit individuals to have an equal say in their government without succumbing to tyranny, was an astonishing feat, but it was not perfect. Well, it sounds like it was far from perfect, frankly. Fortunately, the framers recognized that their work would need adjustment. They wrote into the Constitution that future generations could amend it. And that is chapter 23. It's going to take a minute. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to read this in light of what we're facing right now. It seems to me we don't do enough of this type of reminding. I was listening to the closing arguments today in the Jeff Clark disbarment or disciplinary hearing, I guess. And, I think we've all known, and we've always known, that institutionally, institutions protect each other. And white men and white women. Yeah, I don't know. People? I don't know. But it sure feels like mostly white people. Yes, I know. Gus agrees with me. He agrees with what I'm about to say. That people just protect people. And that means that bad people protect bad people. And now it feels like, in one regard, we're so far down the bad people protect bad people that we can't get out of it, because otherwise everybody's bad. Which I know isn't true, but I guess none of them feel like they have an escape hatch to just stop enabling bad people. Corporations do it all the time. I know, the cat's very upset. What's the matter, Gus? Gus, come here. I think we've got the zoomies. Come on, Gussie. It's alright. Come here. I know. I know. He's looking at the crystal lamp. I think the reflection is... What's the matter? No, don't do it. Don't do it. It's not real. It's not real. Oh, these cats make me so happy. What's the matter, Gus? Tell him. Tell him. Come here. Are you done? No. Come here. He's meowing. No! Get down. trying to chasten it. Would you?
I literally heard it and I was like, what the hell is that? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, let's do it.
Oh my god. Okay. Anyway. Sir, are you okay? I really don't think you want to pounce for that. You're gonna hit a wall. Okay. Anyway, sorry about that. This is Adams. Yes. He's looking at me like, don't call me Thomas Jefferson. It's like, stop calling me Thomas Jefferson. I hate it. Alright, well. Anyway, okay, I think he's fine. Yeah, Gus is us. That's right, we are Gus. Democracy Kitty. Destructive Kitty. Okay, well, you're gonna knock it over. That's okay. Alright, anyway. Well, that was brought to you by Gustafer. Little Gus. The Gus Show. That's right. Ouch. Maybe he would probably do better. He would probably get good feedback. Oh my god. Alright, anyway, let's move on with this. Chapter 24. That's so funny. Everybody okay there?
Yeah, I accidentally gave them an insane amount of treats. They're definitely gonna be fine. Yeah, they're good.
Okay.
For sure.
Alright. Thank you. That was nice of you. Thank you. Good night. Oh, my lord. Okay. Now, let's come back. Back to center. Okay. Chapter 24. Expanding democracy. Alright, he wanted to try. Yeah, well, treats are the answer for everything, frankly. Yeah, exactly. Gus, if you know Gus, he's a pretty big boy. Gus on cannabis. Yeah, no, he doesn't deal with that. And this is just a straight up treat. He loves treats. Mushroom gummies. Oh my god. I wouldn't even want to think about it. Gus is definitely real. Alright, here we go. Chapter 24. Expanding democracy. From the beginning, Indigenous Americans, Black Americans, and women noted that the principles articulated in the Declaration of Independence ought to apply to them as well as to propertied white men. In 1774, the year after her enslavers relinquished their claim on her, Boston poet Phyllis Wheatley wrote to Michigan. Excuse me, my eyes are a little bothered after my medical stuff last week, so I apologize. Things are a little blurry. Boston poet Phyllis Wheatley wrote to Mohegan cleric Samson Occam about the hypocrisy of leaders who rallied for freedom while practicing enslavement. Quote, "In every human breast, God has implanted a principle which we call love of freedom. It is impatient of oppression and pants for deliverance," she wrote, adding, "I will assert that the same principle lives in us." She noted the strange absurdity of their conduct, whose words and actions are so diametrically opposite. How well the cry for liberty and the reverse disposition for the exercise of oppressive power over others agree. I humbly think it does not require the penetration of a philosopher to determine. John Adams' wife, Abigail, agreed and sought to prescribe a solution to the strange absurdity that Wheatley identified. "I long to hear that you have declared an independency," she wrote to John in March 1776, And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could be. The framers did not include rights for women in the new code of laws, but the principles outlined in the Declaration of Independence gave those excluded from those principles by the Constitution both the language and the right to challenge their exclusion. Famously, in 1852, formerly enslaved maritime worker Frederick Douglass asked, quote, what to the slave is the 4th of July? He honored the founders as great men, but asked, quote, are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? In that question, Douglass drew attention to a theme that excluded Americans had emphasized since the nation's founding. In 1791, black mathematician and naturalist Benjamin Banneker directly called out then Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson for praising the proper ideas of the great valuation of liberty and the free possession of those blessings to which you were entitled by nature, while at the same time detaining by fraud and violence so numerous a part of my brethren under groaning captivity and cruel oppression. In 1848, Douglass had been present at the Seneca Falls Convention in upstate New York, when reformers insisting that women should have equal rights wrote a Declaration of Sentiments. Following the format of the Declaration of Independence, they asserted that all men and women are created equal, and that the history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations upon the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. As proof, they listed the facts that men refused to let women vote and compelled their obedience to laws they had no say in creating, including ones that took all their property and gave all power, including that of owning their children, to husbands. Men limited the educational opportunities available to women, shut them out of most professions, and worked to destroy women's confidence in their own strength to trick them into dependency. The reformers at Seneca Falls demanded, quote, immediate admission to all the rights and privilege which belonged to them as citizens of these United States. The Declaration of Independence gave marginalized Americans not just the language, but also the grounds to challenge the laws that made them unequal. While the Revolutionary War was still raging, Elizabeth Freeman, an enslaved woman living in Sheffield, Massachusetts, heard the language of her new state constitution's declaration that all men are born free and equal, echoing the Declaration of Independence. She sued for her freedom. Her lawyers argued that the principles in the Constitution meant that the state could not defend enslavement, and a jury agreed, awarding Freeman and an associated plaintiff 30 shillings in damages and the costs of the trial. Quoque Walker, suing around the same time for freedom and damages, also won his case in a Massachusetts courtroom. The judge had concluded that enslavement had been a usage in the colony, but that the idea of slavery is inconsistent with our own conduct and constitution, and there can be no such thing as perpetual servitude of a rational creature. Not every bid for equality was as successful as those of Freeman and Walker. In the early republic, judges grappled with the idea that the concept of liberty and independence should include women. The 1805 case of Martin v. Massachusetts explored whether women could make their own political decisions. The presiding judge concluded that the idea of liberty could not possibly mean the destruction of men's patriarchal authority. Instead, men included women in the new order by redefining them as Republican mothers, whose role in the new society was not to vote and hold office, but rather to rear their sons to be good citizens and patriots. Indigenous Americans also turned to the courts to protect their rights. Cherokee in Georgia had adjusted to the influx of Euro-Americans by adopting a plantation economy, including slavery, developing their own written, adopting a plantation economy, including slavery, developing their own written language and newspaper, and in 1827, establishing their own constitution based on the U.S. Constitution. When Congress passed the 1830 Indian Removal Act, Chief John Ross and his advisors, acting under the advice of Senators Daniel Webster of New Hampshire and Theodore Frelinghuysen of New Jersey, hired former Attorney General William Wirt to defend their rights under the U.S. Constitution. They lost their first suit, but in 1832, in Worcester v. Georgia, the Supreme Court declared that the Cherokees were a sovereign nation and could make their own laws, settling forever the question as to who is right and who is wrong, as one Cherokee put it. But the Cherokee victory ran up against another group clamoring for inclusion in the new system: poor white men. The Constitution created a framework for democracy, but didn't really make it clear on how ordinary people, ordinary men in those days, would engage with their government, aside from those few who had the right to vote for their leaders. The framers expected that governmental affairs would continue to be run by folks like them, and since they did not expect that their new country would develop political parties, they hoped that they could harness a man's self-interest to create a government that would not become tyrannical. This abstract system broke down fast. By the 1820s, Southern leaders worried that Northern merchants and bankers would take over the new nation. When congressmen threw their votes to the Massachusetts-born son of a farmer president, John Quincy Adams, for the presidency in 1824, over the Southern Indian fighter Andrew Jackson, their fears seemed to have come true. Jackson promptly began to characterize the federal government as a distant tyranny run by elites that was trampling the rights of ordinary white men. Taking a drink. Southern white men began to argue that true democracy was located not in the federal government, but in the states. This sounds familiar. Excuse me. The federal government was distant, they argued, and its leaders were trying to impose their unwelcome values on people whose needs and cultures were different than the leaders acknowledged. One such intrusion was the decision in Worcester v. Georgia recognizing the Cherokee's sovereignty. Andrew Jackson, who defeated Adams to become president in 1829 and thus was in office when the decision came down, made it clear that he would not enforce it. One man recalled that he sportively said in private conversation that if called upon to support the decree by the court, he will call on those who have brought about the decision to enforce it, and that he will call on the militia of Massachusetts. Jackson's supporters, members of the new Democratic Party, began to articulate a new language of democracy based in ordinary men rather than in the traditional ruling class. Poet Walt Whitman in 1855 juxtaposed, quote, the president holding a cabinet council surrounded by the great secretaries, with three matrons stately and friendly, the crew of the fish smack, the Missourian, toting his wares and his cattle. The indescribable crowd is gathered. It is the 4th of the 7th month, with salutes of cannon and small arms. But for all of Whitman's celebration of the many peoples of the United States, the demand of poorer white men for inclusion in the government was based on the idea of keeping other marginalized people out. States' rights democracy kept white men in charge, for they were the voters who determined the shape of the state governments. Those white men advanced their own interest at the expense of their brown and black neighbors, declaring it the nation's manifest destiny to push the indigenous Americans off their lands and take over the parts of Mexico to establish plantations and plantation slavery there. Above all, they protected and extended the practice of human enslavement that people like Elizabeth Freeman had successfully challenged 70 years before. The triumph of this populist democracy took indigenous American lands in the Southeast, enabling the Southern system of enslavement to spread into the rich, quote, black belt, so called for the color of its soil. Those white enslavers for whom the booming economy worked best defended the states' rights, which allowed a minority to impose its will over the wishes of a national majority, as the heart of American democracy. They silenced their opponents, took away the right to petition the government to end human enslavement, closed off access to opposing opinions, and in 1837 murdered Elijah P. Lovejoy, who had moved to Alton, Illinois from Albion, Maine, to begin a newspaper dedicated to the abolition of human enslavement. Elijah's younger brother Owen saw Elijah shot and swore his allegiance to the cause of abolition. Quote, "I shall never forsake the cause that has been sprinkled with my brother's blood," he declared. By the 1850s, those defenders of human enslavement made up only a small minority of the country. Realizing the vast majority of Americans objected to their ideology, they rewrote American history, claiming that the framers had deliberately established a nation based in states' rights and white supremacy. The nation was a collection of states, President Franklin Pierce insisted in 1855, and the framers had deliberately established only a federal republic of the free white men of the colonies. Quote, "The Democrats set out to shape the nation according to their new version of history. They advanced the idea that the question of human enslavement should be decided not by the national majority, but by, quote, popular sovereignty, in which the local voters got to decide the fate of the institution. But they quickly hedged the idea of voters' choice by making it impossible for voters to choose to build states without enslavement. Under their system, Southern enslavers could pick up the extra states they needed to overawe the free states in the national government and spread enslavement across the country. Then they prohibited the federal government from interfering with slavery. This popular sovereignty, politicians said, was the true meaning of American democracy, and it meant that the nation would throw out the self-evident truths of the Declaration of Independence that all men were created equal and had a right to say in their government, and become one based instead on racial hierarchies in which some people were better than others and had the right to rule. But not everyone agreed. In 1858, rising politician Abraham Lincoln told an audience, quote, "I ask you in all soberness, if all these things, if indulged in, if ratified, if confirmed and endorsed, if taught to our children and repeated to them, do not tend to rub out the sentiment of liberty in the country, and to transform this government into a government of some other form. Those arguments are the arguments that kings have made for enslaving the people in all ages of the world, whether it come from the mouth of a king, an excuse for enslaving the people of his country, or from the mouth of men of one race as a reason for enslaving the men of another race. It is all the same old serpent." And that's chapter 24. We're moving right along. There's something both calming and upsetting about reading history. There's a calmness in that these events, I guess there's a calmness in the objectivity. There's a calmness in the objectivity of a nonfiction, if it's done right, I guess. And then there's, of course, the subject matter. And just kind of like I just never, I don't know. I just never thought we'd, I don't know. I don't really know. I have no idea. I have a feeling this is going to be a very difficult section to read. Yeah, I am too. I don't know, it's just helpful. And I don't know it as well as I should. I mean, definitely. I feel like I can always know it better. I think. Uh-oh, what happened to our fire? Hold on, let me get our fire back. I'm sorry. I didn't know that. Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. Yeah, Gus is one of the kitties. Yeah. But yeah. Yeah, Gus is one of the kitties. He was having quite the breakdown earlier. But he's fine now. I think he's got quite a full little tummy. He got some treats. Oh, I may have spoken too soon. He'll probably come back in. I just heard him. We'll see. Hopefully he does. It's always good. Out of the mouths of babes. It was cute. Alright, chapter 25. Mudsills or Men. By 1860, the American South was producing more than 2 billion pounds of cotton annually, grown and processed by enslaved Americans and their poor white neighbors. The wealthiest Southerners were the nation's richest people, drinking French wine under European masterpieces in one of their several gracious homes, while their wives wore imported silk gowns. The elite Southerners, those who enslaved more than 20 of their black neighbors, insisted that theirs was the perfect economic, political, and social system. They explained that the nation's... I object to her use of the word neighbors. I'm sorry, so I apologize. Not the word I would have chosen, because they didn't treat them as neighbors. I know, I wish I would have appreciated history more when I was younger too, Jen. It's a good point. Okay, they explained that the nation's founders had made a terrible error in their assertion that all men were created equal. In place of that fundamentally wrong idea, they proposed the great truth that white men were a, quote, superior race. All of those were in quotation marks, by the way. And within that superior race, some men were better than others. In 1858, South Carolina Senator James Henry Hammond explained that society was made up of two groups. Most people were mudsills, named for the timbers driven into the ground to support gracious homes above. They performed menial duties and had a low order of intellect, but little skill. A few people made up that other class which leads progress, civilization, and refinement. They oversaw the mudsills' lives and labor. Mudsills produced capital that accumulated in the hands of society's leaders, who used that great wealth to invest in business and culture to move the country forward. Southern elites saw them as not as brutal exploiters, but as modern-day incarnation of genteel British aristocrats. In their view, Southern leaders were not money grubbers like Northern merchants and men on the make, but chivalrous men with fine manners and unparalleled courage and great skill on horseback. They protected their dependents, enslaved people and women, and their poor white neighbors, and defended their own honor. Meanwhile, their civilized and Christian oversight elevated their inferiors. Removing them from that protection would be cruel. But those wealthy Southerners were only too aware that they were a tiny minority of the U.S. population. By 1860, the North had 22 million of the nation's 31 million people. Only 9 million lived in the South, and 4 million of them were enslaved black Americans. White elites made up only about 4% of the Southern white population, about 0.6% of the nation's people. To maintain their power, Southern leaders made common cause with Southern men who defended local government and for whom opposition to the federal government had become the core of their political identity. In the 1840s, when Northern leaders began to try and stop the expansion of slavery through federal law, Southern white leaders insisted that such action was an attack on democracy, which they were coming to define as states' rights. By the 1850s, Southern leaders had narrowed that definition of democracy even further. They insisted that the framers had never intended for democracy to mean that voters got to influence policy. They could merely vote to change their leaders. Indeed, they argued, the framers had set up the system so that it could never come under the sway of a mob. Federal lawmakers could do nothing that was not explicitly enumerated in the Constitution. The framers had limited the government so it could do nothing but protect property, even if an overwhelming majority of Americans wanted the government to do something more expansive, it could not. I know we're trying. In their eyes, anyone questioning this definition of democracy was trying to destroy the country by starting a race war. White men must stick together, or black Americans would take over their region, and once freed from oversight, would steal white men's property and rape white women and children, the mirror of what enslavers themselves were doing to black people. Leaders outlawed possession of books and pamphlets that questioned the slave system, those that urged solidarity among poor white men, as well as those challenging enslavement, and they provoked violence against those they called agitators. By closing off access to factual information, enslavers could use the media, churches, society, and politics to spread their worldview first in the South and then nationally. Oh, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Their worldview was taking over the country. In the 1850s, Southern elites who controlled the government of their states took over first the Democratic Party and then through it the Senate, where each state had 2 seats regardless of population, and the White House. Control of those 2 institutions meant they also took control of the Supreme Court. In 1854, Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, repealing the 1820 Missouri Compromise that had limited slavery to the East. 2 years later, a Southern representative beat Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner almost to death on the Senate floor for complaining about it. In 1857, the Supreme Court, whose Chief Justice hailed from a slave state, said explicitly in Dred Scott v. Sanford that the founders had not intended to include black Americans in the Declaration of Independence, regarding them as, quote, beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit, close quote. What fucking horrible. I can't believe this. In that same decision, the court also ruled that Congress had no power to stop slavery from spreading into the territories. Popular sovereignty became the rule of the West, with a stunning implication. Slavery would become national. The Constitution required states to protect property of all kinds, which in turn meant that if a single enslaver brought enslaved Americans into a territory, the eventual state would have to protect enslavement there. Slave states would quickly outnumber free states, and their representatives would work to make enslavement national, sweeping the free North into their system. But just as Southern elites seemed about to turn their radical revision of the country into law of the land, their opponents woke up. White men from poor backgrounds found outrageous the idea of a hierarchical world in which white men were stuck forever either rich or poor. The 1825 opening of the Erie Canal had siphoned men to the west, while new factories back east had upended the economy and established cities, creating a new way for young men from the backwoods to rise to prosperity. Hammond, who preached about mudsills, had bought his way to prominence with his wife's money, and and his Senate seat was handed to him by his friend, the governor, after Hammond had been exposed for raping his nieces. To Northern men on the make, someone like Hammond, too far. Someone like Hammond couldn't hold a candle to hard-working, principled people like themselves. When Congress opened the West for slavery and Democratic President Franklin Pierce claimed that the founders had intended the United States to be a white man's republic in which, quote, free white men ruled over the subject races, Indian and African, Northern men abandoned their previous political affiliations and joined together to oppose the slave power. Newspaper men like Joseph Medill of the Chicago Tribune called out as false all through the idea that the founders had not meant all men are created equal when they put that sentiment into the Declaration of Independence, and people all across the North agreed. Most white Northerners didn't much care about black rights, but enslavement had turned the South into an oligarchy, reducing poor white men to landless destitution, and they worried the same would happen in the West and North if enslavers weren't permitted to take over. They held meetings and rallies across the North just as the revolutionary generation had done, warning that America was falling under the sway of an oligarchy. They launched such widespread attacks on Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas, who had pushed through the Kansas-Nebraska Act, that he joked he could travel across the country by light of his own burning effigies. And they began to coalesce into a new political party, the Republicans. Let's see, I missed what you said, Siegfried. Off topic, many people comment in the negative videos I've seen on doom and gloom. Misled about, yeah. I'm watching an excellent show on Apple called Manhunt. I want to watch that too, Siegfried. I want to watch that too. I was thinking about that the other day. I should probably put that on Discord. I know. I did not, I mean, I did realize that about the Confederate, the push, but I didn't realize that about the strategy of using the definition of property and as a way to then use the representation. It's fascinating to me. So yeah, it's really interesting. Learning a lot. Oops. Oh, now I did it. Screw that up. Okay, I think I got this. Douglas and the Democrats stood firm on popular sovereignty, courting racists by insisting that white supremacy was true Americanism and that anyone opposing it was I'm going to not use the expletive. But in 1858, Illinois lawyer Abraham Lincoln ran for the U.S. Senate against Douglas, facing the racist crowds with humor and insisting the idea that all men are created equal must prevail. I should like to know, Lincoln said in July 1858, if taking this old Declaration of Independence, which declares that all men are equal upon principle, and making exceptions to it, where will it stop? If that declaration is not the truth, let us get the statute book in which we find it and tear it out. Who is as bold as to do it? Lincoln rejected the idea that the nation should be based on white supremacy. He tied his political position, equality before the law, to the real history of the nation's founding. White male voters began to listen. Douglas won re-election, but Lincoln's insistence on equality before the law evolved into a political ideology that would challenge that of the Southern enslavers. He rejected the idea that society moved forward thanks to the efforts of a few rich men, and denied that most people belonged to a lower mental class into which they were, as he said, fatally fixed for life. Instead, Lincoln argued that society progressed thanks to the hard work and innovation of ordinary people. While rich men had no incentive to think up new ideas, he said, ordinary Americans worked and innovated so they could provide for themselves. As they did, they made more money than they and their families needed, so they would use the surplus to buy goods that would support merchants, shoemakers, and so on. In turn, those people would work hard and accumulate capital, which would support a few financiers and industrialists who would use their own accumulated capital to hire men just starting out, and the cycle would begin again. The heart of the system was not the wealthy men, but hard-working ordinary ones. The key to making the system work was the government's guarantee that all men, not just rich white men, were equal before the law and had equal access to resources, including education. Lincoln had grown up poor, and as a young man trying to establish himself, had watched his town of New Salem, Illinois, die because settlers didn't have the resources to dredge the Sangamon River to increase their river trade. Had the government simply been willing to invest in economic development, the men could have brought prosperity to the town. Without that investment, working men failed. If only the government would step in to do what individuals couldn't, Lincoln believed, it would keep the economic playing field between the rich and poor level, dramatically expand opportunity, and develop the economy. This was a profound innovation. Lincoln adjusted the liberalism of the founders, which focused on protecting individual rights from an overreaching government, to acknowledge that maintaining those rights required government action. Lincoln's vision made sense to men like him, who had worked their way up from hardscrabble backgrounds to respectability. When the Republicans nominated Lincoln for president in 1860, they set his vision up against that of enslavers. To build enthusiasm for their candidates, Republicans established local clubs where young men could throw parties and invite young women. They also enlisted the help of enthusiasts who flocked behind the Western rail splitter, encouraging local quasi-military marching groups to spread their message. Wide awakes wore capes and black hats and carried torches in their long parades to escort Republican politicians to political events. There they protected the speaker and filled up the venue. By 1860 there were as many as 500,000 wide awakes, who then brought their friends to join the movement. Their tactics worked. Republicans tied equality before the law to the principles of the founders. They emphasized the danger of giving up democracy to an elite that based its power on a white supremacist reading of U.S. history. They promised to use the federal government for everyone. In 1860, voters chose Lincoln's vision of equality before the law and elected him to the White House. Thwarted from taking control of the United States, the leaders of the 7 southern states, claiming to uphold democracy, took the radical step necessary to keep themselves in charge. They railroaded their states out of the Union even before Lincoln took office in March 1861, setting out to create their own nation based on the, quote, great truth that the, quote, Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. They believed that, quote, this, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth, and that they would lead the rest of the world to a new economic prosperity based on their new form of government. That is chapter 25. That's a lot. It's a lot of emotional text. Oh, sorry, I messed up all your comments. I'm sorry, everybody. I wasn't paying attention to the size of the box. Yeah, it was heavy. But I felt anxious to get more of the book read for people. So I thought I should try. But I think there's about 5 more chapters, so I don't want to overwhelm. Yeah, it is interesting. It's really interesting. I mean, I realize it's a pretty basic overview of the times, so I know there's headier books on each of these subjects. Tom, I can't wait for your videos. I hope you're having fun. Just remember to have fun. It's important to have fun. Always have fun. Hopefully music. Oh, weather hasn't. Oh, it's cold there. Huh? Is it cold? I think it's cold, right? I was watching somewhere today, it was snowing. I was like, wow, it's snowing. I don't know why. I feel like it shouldn't be snowing anymore. I know, I want to see these Tom videos. This tomfoolery. What tomfoolery are you up to, Tom? Definitely. Sounds good. Take your time. There's no rush. Or there's no time limit. Late. It's late. What time is it? That's not too bad. Yeah, we're ready. Whenever you're ready, Tom, we're ready. I need things to watch during the day. No, I'm kidding. Come on, Tom. I'm just kidding. Alright, well, thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate you. Oh, wait, have you seen the new... Isn't that crazy, Lee? Crazy to see snow these days. I don't know why. Shouldn't be. Oh yeah, that's right. Oomph has a couple of new things. I gotta, drop those links. Wait, let me find the link. Yep. Boostery. Let's see here. Let me find it. Hold on. I'm gonna drop it. I'm gonna drop it like it's hot. Where is it? Hold on. I've got it. Here we go. Yeah, I don't know where the cats went. I think this is it. This better be it. Yes, good night. Good night, Lee. There we go. Why is this? I don't know why this thing keeps going out. Here, wait. We're gonna end on that. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna end on oops thing. Hold on. Wait. Hold on. Oops. Dang it. Wait a minute. Let me fix this. I don't know where GP's been. Here we go, wait.
Human, for dedication you keep prosthetic eye indiscriminate there. Television once Bible comprised. Are shaking now souls improvising believe? Sing, precision, the perspective temporary, low. strong city, grown inaccessible Protestant land factors would insert Bible safewage body and hope defense leaves driven, king shallow language, questions launching to, reach the forbid. Rational program, average olive flood, adverse volume of comparison equity, resonate cold and obvious perhaps, and air, to mouth animating by methyl methacrylate, Jesus with electrodes mobile may label 2 applications in Earth, their maneuverability whaling Bible. Many talking channels provide thou junk, so Jesus, do the polymer guide vibration for the monitoring personnel, for you is us, and malfunction life, acquisition, malformation. For reduced first miles body or rhetoric into significant solve, exhausts either space of the common digital we, either is, with brilliant sufficiency, string, collagen, bone, and sing any feedback of the Jesus fly. Do index and, like faith, liquid poems, difficult form, make the refracted questions body while through all possibility cells age, Christ, adulthood. Support then Jesus 2-hydroxybenzophenol disease matrices by resurrection, preacher, by concentric worldwide high-speed energy, surveillance some do of the poet community, believe. Heresy, sang cancer, tried material, say Christ, defense, each sang, the electromagnetic cancer level sang irrigated proline but, pressing, bound us to cheer experience of lies, the two-way tent advance Arium rhythm bomb prophets, redundant as a tri-leaflet of blood common skin. Believe space. Lie at the serum, Bible graft law fixed, they sang, a Bible all Bible, a bioabsorbable TV, the stores waited, playground and vain, mission translation, risk the laser dissipated lubricious small Jesus scroll launch rings in the iBible document fire, the froth bland, all you the product scene, weight and chart, tactical as precision, Venus on cellular body, reveal sojourn on gesture. Brass can, sang pacing catheter, make old steel crete accessible, data mingle, living the energy body using skin, or fired, one logo reduction in. Pacing into dedicates by we do such collecting, the instantaneous protest, the risk and time, we, down it persistent now, believe a weapon infectious Sigbur sword, form is acryloxy, your information are always reflux, but denominator lamentations on the absurd argued color in some 7th grade capabilities, fire 2, sang no personal theory, believe deployed high information, he will replace the listed yes with process, since an associated file is occur must, oh man, a guess severe and in body costly, so his state. Sensor censors the circuitry, body of belief for high, water and reagent, potent murdered world's own sense, instances degrade association, what homeland, this electromedical platonist within artificial essay, man, protein, I champion gravity, total and hemodynamically fixed, be surgical bred, analytic, tell hard, E-systems, common and socio-computational intelligence, the blood brainwashing target, that cumbersome rhythmias and machinic system issue denoting mystics to analysis. Precise, sang believe tactical, that's in management wavelength body, damn it, an informed system without pink speed or in it, sing, Venus defibrillator, white, for all sang custom fault matrices pathological college, we, single with human posterior flesh, sharp questions and equity, dye cytometry monitor and resonant intraocular blood city, below average, no protein engineered microchips, urine bioluminescent sang, able rhythm sang shatter the risk absorbable, sang body redundant matrix, neurological, be record, hewings with Christ's triglyceride. I came, space buried early proof minded form and overcame steel, beyond lost processing infection or the enemy's Bible. If so, power automated logic without striking stealth. Do I quote satellites from men disseminating you? Resonate fiberglass testimony. Sing cable tolerant good? Read. Asking to do. Sang is. Unfolding radiolucent exists about a ballistic issue. Producing no defense effects.
Well, that actually is one of my favorite. I'm sorry I didn't adjust the volume. I should have adjusted the volume. But I really like that one. I just like I love the notes. And I love music that travels. I feel like that music travels. And I also love putting things together that don't necessarily always go together. That to me is like the definition of art. So anyway, thanks for sharing that. I think it's great. And I hope you do more of it. And I can't wait to see your channel, Tom. And I hope everyone does some stuff. I think it would be really good. It'd be so good if more people just went ahead and created whatever. You know, I just think we could use more of that. So here. Here's to the artists. Art is everywhere. Darn it. It really is. It really is if you look. Because you might as well, right? I mean, there might as well be art everywhere. I don't know. Actually, that's not the way I feel about it. I feel like there is art everywhere. Because if something moves you, that's art. You know what I mean? And sometimes art can be really, well, anyway. It's a whole thing. Doesn't matter. Nothing really matters. Hopefully some music coming sometime in the sometime in the sometime. God, I just can't get this thing to work. Space-wise. Space balls. Yeah. No, it's, yeah, it is. The song is really interesting. Ishmael, oh yeah, Abdullah Ibrahim, before he became Abdullah Ibrahim and learned about him not making songs. Oh. Check out the version with sax and vocals. Starts with gong. You'll know it when you found it. I can't wait. Now I'm going to search it out. I thought it sounded familiar. I love it. I loved it. I love the images. And I love that. I mean, I think AI is fun with, and there's something that's really cool about the fact that different people are putting different stuff into AI and then what comes out. I don't know. I just think the whole thing is cool. The whole thing's cool. Anyway. Art's cool. Art is cool. That's exciting. I don't know. I like it. Anyway, thank you for sharing that. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It means a lot. It means a ton. It means a lot. It means so much. So much. Oh, no AI involved. Oh, forgive me. Oh, I mean, I'm sorry. I meant the pictures. Because I thought some of those might have been pictures from AI. So sorry. That's what I meant. I didn't mean the music. I meant the pictures. But yeah. Anyway. Nothing really matters. Anyone can see. Nothing really matters. Nothing really matters to me. Let's see. That data done by hand. Oh, what? What? I apologize. I did not know. That's awesome. That's fun. That's cool. That's cool. Used without permission. Well, that happens. Anyway, thank you all for coming very much. Eventually I'll finish this book. But I just realized tonight I really need to finish the book for everybody. As a sense of closure. A sense of closure is important, I guess. Yeah, it is. No, it is. No, it is. Sure it is. So, have a wonderful, I don't know what day it is. I think it's Thursday, I think. Have a good Thursday. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I wish I did, but I don't. So, and sorry guys for shocking you with big noise, big volume changes. I didn't mean to do that. That's not very relaxing. But have a lovely night, and I will see you hopefully soon. Alright. Do good work out there. You guys go out there and do good stuff. I'll do too. Okay. I'll see you later.